Have you ever really thought about like how the words we use, even the super common ones, the ones we don't even think about, actually how those words can totally shape how we see the world?
It's kind of crazy how often we use metaphors without even realizing.
Yeah.
We usually think of them like in poems or books,
Yeah.
but they're super important in how we wrap our heads around like complex science stuff.
It's like what our source material for this deep dive, how metaphors guide, teach, and popularize science, points out it's like we're just swimming in metaphors every single day. They're everywhere, and we
Yeah.
don't even realize that they're kind of secretly shaping how we interpret, well, everything.
Yeah.
From our everyday chats to like huge scientific discoveries.
Yeah, to really get how powerful they are, we got to dig into something called conceptual metaphor theory. This theory says that metaphors aren't just like language tools. They actually structure how we think.
Whoa, so it's like deeper than just words. It's like hardwired into our brains.
It's almost as if our brains are constantly looking for something familiar when they come across something really complex, you know?
So tell me more about that. Like, how does that actually work?
Well, think about a word like life. It's abstract, right?
Yeah.
But our brains want to understand it, so they might connect it to something more concrete, like a journey. And that's how we get the metaphor, life is a journey.
And that just clicks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because everyone's experienced a journey, right? You've got your good times, tough times,
Yeah.
those unexpected detours.
It just makes sense to us because we've lived it. Another good example from the book is love is a war. Obviously, we don't take it literally, but it helps us understand the ups and downs of love through the lens of, conflict, strategy, maybe even like surrender.
That's really interesting. So metaphors aren't just like pretty language. They're actually like these powerful tools our brains use to make sense of everything around us.
Exactly.
We're like totally oblivious to it most of the time.
Yeah, and that's exactly why understanding metaphors is so important. Once we start seeing them, we realize how common and influential they are.
Now, this is where things get kind of wild. The book talks about this idea of the career of metaphor,
Yeah.
which makes it sound like metaphors like have resumes and go on job interviews.
It's a cool way to think about it, right? They've got this whole life cycle thing going on.
So walk me through it.
They start as this like fresh new way of seeing something. And then if enough people are into it,
Right.
they kind of get woven into how we think. Like
Yeah.
we forget they were ever metaphors in the first place.
It's like they're like these undercover agents secretly shaping our thoughts.
Exactly.
So how does this career path thing actually work in science?
Well, think about it. A brand new metaphor, that can be seriously powerful stuff.
Yeah.
It can be like the spark for a whole bunch of new research, like a key that unlocks these doors we didn't even know were there. That's how those aha moments happen, those big breakthroughs.
Okay, that makes sense. A new metaphor could help us see connections we wouldn't have even thought about before. But like, as it gets more popular, could that same metaphor like hold us back too?
Totally. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
How so?
Well, the thing that makes a metaphor strong, makes things simple, relatable, that can also make us oversimplify. We get stuck in one way of thinking, and that can really slow us down.
It's like that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Exactly. The book uses a great example for this, the genetic blueprint.
Oh, yeah.
At first, that was revolutionary. It helps scientists picture DNA, how crazy complex it is, and how it makes us, us.
I remember learning about the genetic blueprint in school.
Yeah,
It seems so, like, elegant.
but as scientists learned more, it became clear that the metaphor, it was too simple. DNA isn't like some static blueprint you just roll out and boom, you've got an organism. It's way more dynamic, always interacting.
It's like a living, breathing code, right?
Yeah.
Always responding to its environment.
Exactly. But because that whole genetic blueprint idea was so stuck, it took a while for scientists to break free and see how dynamic genes really are.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So these metaphors, they can really push science forward, but they can also, like, be roadblocks,
For sure.
which makes you wonder, are there times when a metaphor is straight up misleading, even harmful?
Definitely. And the book talks about this too. One that really got me thinking was when they used cell suicide to describe apoptosis.
Before we go any further, can you remind me what apoptosis is again? It's
Yeah.
not exactly a word you hear every day.
Sure. Apoptosis is basically programmed cell death. It's totally natural, actually essential for our bodies to work right. Think about it. Our bodies are always getting rid of old cells, damaged cells,
Yeah.
making space for new healthy ones. That's apoptosis doing its thing.
Gotcha. So what's wrong with calling it cell suicide? I gotta admit, that phrase always seemed a little I don't know, off to me.
And for good reason. The idea was to give people a vivid picture, but it can create some big misunderstandings. For one, it makes it seem like cells are like thinking, feeling beings.
Right, like they're making this big decision to end it all.
Exactly. But that's not how it works at all. Apoptosis is super regulated. It's crucial for us to develop normally and to get rid of cells that might cause trouble. It's not some conscious decision to self-destruct.
So the cell-suicide metaphor, maybe it helps people visualize it at first, but then it actually hides the real science.
Yeah, and this takes us right back to that career of metaphor idea.
Yeah.
Cell suicide is so common now that people just use it without thinking, even some scientists. And that can lead to people not really getting the process, which could even slow down research.
This is making me realize, like, we really got to pay attention to the metaphors we're running into, especially when it comes to science, right? Like, you need things to be clear, accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it starts with understanding that metaphors, they're not just about the words themselves. It's more about the whole, like, framework they create in our minds. They shape how we see a problem, an issue, a discovery, you name it. Take how we talk about climate change, for example.
Oh, yeah. There are so many metaphors for that. Climate crisis, carbon footprint, tipping point. It's like they definitely paint a picture, right? For better or worse.
And each one of those, it comes with its own baggage, its own assumptions, its own implications. Like climate crisis, that gives you that sense of urgency.
Yeah.
But then carbon footprint, that puts the focus on what each person is doing, their own responsibility. We've got to recognize those subtle differences if we want to think critically about this stuff.
So it's like we've got to be metaphor detectives, right? Like looking for clues, questioning everything.
Exactly. We start thinking critically about the metaphors we're hearing, and that's how we start to see past the surface, get a deeper understanding of what's really being said.
This has been a total eye-opener. I feel like I need to go back and like re-listen to everything I thought I knew about science.
And that's what's so great about it. It's not about like diminishing the wonder of science. It's about adding to it. It lets us engage with these ideas on a whole other level.
Yeah, you're right. It's like our deep dive today wasn't just